My special guest on today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast is Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad, Poor Dad fame. When Robert's team reached out to me and asked if I'd like to have him as a guest on my podcast, I jumped at the opportunity because I heard he has a message he wanted to share with Australians about the challenges for our economy ahead and the opportunities that are going to come on the other side of the downturn. Now, I don't agree with everything he has to say, but I respect that he's taught not only me, but millions and millions of people about the basics of financial literacy, so I was keen to hear his opinion. Robert's teachings challenge conventional thinking about money, and he suggests that you should be doing what the 99% are not doing. Now, I know Robert's views have changed how many people think about money and finance, and I realise that the major financial shock our current coronavirus pandemic has caused has revealed how many Australians just don't understand the long-lasting impact of the financial decisions they're making today. Recently, Australian research has shown that a quarter of young people don't have a basic understanding of personal finance. And with Instagram and social media today fueling this buy now, worry later attitude, it's only going to get worse, isn't it? But fortunately, there's now a bigger push for financial literacy being taught in Australia's school curriculums, and that's something that Robert's been advocating for decades. So you're going to enjoy as we talk a bit about Robert Kiyosaki's basic financial concepts before we get into deeper topics like what's ahead for our economy, the shadow banking system, how deep our recession is going to be, but also the great opportunities that are ahead once we get through the downturn. You'll also hear Robert speak positively about Australia's opportunities, but you may be shocked by some of his predictions of what's going to happen before these opportunities arise. Now, as I said, I don't agree with all of Robert's thoughts, not all his ideas about real estate, and definitely not some of his thoughts about what's ahead for the economy. But rather than debating him, I gave him the airtime he deserves, and then after our chat, I'm going to share my views with you. So don't panic if you hear some of Robert's extreme thoughts, but please listen to the whole show, including my thoughts, and then you're going to have both sides of the discussion to make your own decisions. I'm sure you're going to enjoy today's show, so welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Robert Kiyosaki is one of the most respected voices in the world on growing your own wealth. He's best known as author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is the #1 personal finance book of all time, and he's challenged the way tens of millions of people around the world think about money. Now, I've got a number of Robert's books on my bookshelf, including one of the books that he co-authored with Donald Trump prior to him becoming President of the United States. I'm honoured to have Robert join us today to discuss the financial concepts that you really must understand to protect and grow your personal wealth in these challenging times. So, Robert, welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast.
Oh, thank you. I got to say this. Aussie, oi, oi, oi.
Well, apart from enjoying your books, I regularly listen to your Rich Dad radio show podcast with your wife, Kim. And yes, this is mainly an Aussie audience, but you're no stranger to Australia, are you? In fact, you spent quite some time here in the 1990s.
Well, I love Aussie. I love the Aussie people. I first went to Aussie in 72, and I went down there with the Hawaii Harlequins rugby team.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we played Bondi, Randwick, and Newcastle. Needless to say, we lost every game. We had a great time, you know what I mean? And it was on the piss, as they say. It was wonderful.
So you've got some good memories of Australia. So, Robert, most of the people listening to this podcast are listening in what most people would suggest is the best country in the world, at what many would suggest would be the best time in history, other than that terrible challenge we're currently having with coronavirus. So, based on that, why are so few people becoming financially independent? Why are the rich getting richer than the average Australian?
Well, it's been my whinge and my complaint for years is what does school teach you about money? And the answer for most people is nothing. And so the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is my poor dad was a PhD, the head of education for the state of Hawaii, went to Stanford, Northwestern, University of Chicago, very smart man, but he knew nothing about money. And then my rich dad was a man who had no education at all, but he was raised in his running the family business. So what's happening in the world today, our world is run by poor dads. You look at the Federal Reserve Bank, there's 900 PhDs, just like my poor dad. And we wonder why we have problems. And you look at our government service, they're a bunch of poor dads. You know, they're not rich people. And so we all see the world from different points of view. Aussie has had your share of interesting characters or entrepreneurs like Kerry Packer and Alan Bond and those guys. You know,
Yes.
they are characters.
Now, I'd like to discuss your thoughts on debt, because there are so many people with bad debt at the moment, not good debt. Here in Australia at present and in the United States, people are taking on, I think your suggestion would be a bit too much debt. What would your advice be to them?
My advice is don't listen to the United States, of all things. And the world has never been in such horrible shape ever. And this goes back to 1971 when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. And the U.S. dollar became debt. And so the only way for the U.S. economy and the world economy to grow was people had to step up to the line and say, I'll take on debt. And the United States is a very nasty country because, let's say the United States goes to Brazil and says, we'll lend you $1 billion to build a dam. And so Brazil says, oh, thank you very much. So they lend them the $1 billion, but the billion never leaves Brazil. It stays in New York. And then the only people that can build a dam are U.S. contractors. The contractors come back to the States, they get rich. The loan stays in the United States. And then Brazil's got to pay back that $1 billion in US dollars. And all over the world, that's what's going on right now. The world owes so much to the US Federal Reserve Bank and Wall Street in US dollars. So that's why the US dollar is so strong. And I saw the Aussie crash the other day, went from 75 to 55 or something. You go, holy mackerel. It's because the world is scrambling for the US dollar. And that's not an accident. And that's the basis of financial education, is the U.S. can only grow if countries like Aussie, New Zealand, China, Brazil get into debt to us. So we screwed the world. And that's why I was always talking to people about, you better understand what they're not teaching about money in school.
So it's not just people who've taken on too much debt, it's countries that have also overcommitted themselves.
Correct. And you know what, I don't mean to be politically incorrect, but in September of 2019, so less than a year ago, there's a thing called the shadow banking system. And that's the real bank system. Most people, it's not what you see on the surface of the street. It's what's underneath. It's the plumbing underneath the banking system started to collapse. So suddenly in September 2019, interest rates for the biggest banks in the world went to 10%. The average guy on the street had no idea what that meant. The stock market was going up and all this, but it meant the banks were going broke. So that's why they raised the interest rates to 10% to Deutsche Bank and to Bank of Japan and all those guys, because the banks were going broke. Meanwhile, the U.S. stock market, this is September, keeps climbing to an all-time high in December of 2019. And suddenly in 2020, coronavirus appears. I smell a rat there. I smell a rat.
Yes, I hear where you're coming from. I want to speak about coronavirus and I'd like to speak about its effect, but let's just go back to some basics if we could, because as I said, I'd love to pick your brain. I loved your concept about the Cashflow Quadrant, and I guess it's going to lead into what people can do moving forward. So that was a book you wrote many, many years ago, but can you please explain that concept to our listeners?
Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a book on accounting. That's all it is. The most boring subject. I was in the MBA program and I flunked out because I fell asleep all the time. And I fell asleep in accounting because my accounting teacher had no idea what he was talking about. But anyway, so the second book, so Rich Dad, Poor Dad is number one, Cashflow Quadrant is number two. And the quadrant is about the four different people that make up the world of money or profession. So E is employee. So when the teacher say, go to school, get a job, they're kind of inculcating you or training your brains to think like an employee. Like my poor dad, go to school, get a job, steady paycheck, job security, and pension. And then the S is below the E, stands for self-employed or specialist. So my mother wanted me to be a specialist, a doctor. And I said, Mom, doctors are smart. She says, you're right. You shouldn't be a doctor. I didn't have brain power for it. And then B is on the far right, upper right quadrant. And B actually stands for brand. So the most successful big businesses in the world are brands. They have over 500 employees, yada, 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 yada. So as a young man, an I stands for inside investor. An inside investor is a private investor. I personally don't invest in the stock market. I put my own deals together because I'm an entrepreneur. So I structure my own financing, my own deals and all that. But the average person is an E and S, and most people who are entrepreneurs don't ever build a brand, a big business. And most people invest through your superannuations and all that into Wall Street or your Macquarie Bank and all that. So there are four different people. I don't have stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or ETFs. I don't have a super. I don't have a 401k because I don't need them. But it's all dependent upon your education. And without financial education, the average person does not see the other side of the quadrant, what the big businesses or the brands are doing and the professional investors.
Well, these people think differently too, don't they? They're looking for different things in life. So the employee is really looking for security. But that's a false security, isn't it, Robert?
Especially today. I mean, Michael, that's why I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad 25 years ago, because I could see this crash coming. I wrote Rich Dad's Prophecy in 1999, which said the biggest crash in history was coming in 2016. It arrived in 2020, March 2020. The market went down, 3 major blasts. Generally, it takes 3 to 4 months to enter a bear market. We hit it in 3 weeks. It was the biggest crash in world history. And I don't know if anybody knows that happened because the coronavirus, which I said is kind of a smokescreen of this whole thing. People were watching the coronavirus versus the stock market crashing.
So what I guess I'm reading in between the lines is the coronavirus was just the trigger for what you thought was going to come all along.
Yeah, I mean, this coronavirus is a horrible thing, And like I said, I smell a rat. There's a lot of conspiracy stuff going on. But I just think it's overreaction because it's destroying, more people are going to die of suicide than coronavirus.
Yes, it's creating mental health issues, isn't it?
Yeah. How many small businesses have been wiped out? You look at in the United States, Neiman Marcus just declared bankruptcy. Lord & Taylor just bankruptcy. It's killing many, many, many people, far more than the virus will ever kill.
So what do you think is going to happen to the average Australian's financial future moving forward now?
Well, I like I said, I love Aussie. I really, really do. I love the country. I love the people. I'm worried. You missed the 2008 recession because you guys were so strong on China. But China's in trouble now. So if China's in trouble and America's in trouble and Russia's in trouble, Aussie's in big trouble. And so your economy is built upon exports. You export a lot of raw materials and you import fine materials. So I feel for Aussie. I feel for him.
Now, you're suggesting that this is a bubble that's been travelling a long time that's about to burst. But, Robert, can't it just deflate slowly? Does it really have to burst?
I said the biggest stock market crash was coming in 2016, but it happened in March of 2020. There's something else I didn't realize when I wrote Rich Dad's Prophecy, went back in 1999, was that every 90 years there is a major, major reset. Every 90 years. And so you look at 1929 and 2019, it's exactly 90 years. It's a collision of many things at one time. So coronavirus was a trigger, but there was other underlying factors that made it weak and make it worse.
So how bad do you think this crisis is going to get, Robert?
Well, probably a 10% chance we go into a collapse. And a collapse is like what happened in to the Roman Empire That's what happened in the Bronze Age. It could be that serious. Hopefully not.
Now, I heard you say, though, that with the right financial education, this downturn could actually be the best thing that would happen to you. What do you mean by that?
This crash?
Well, yes. Yeah, if you've got the right financial education, you could, I guess I'm reading between the lines, suggesting it will be a transfer of wealth for some people.
Right. I didn't like school. That was my poor dad's world. But they tell you don't make mistakes. Well, how does a human being learn without making mistakes? And so that's why people cling to job security, steady paycheck, and a pension or super. And they're so afraid of making mistakes. So now they're paralyzed. And the other thing, too, is they tell you don't cheat. And cheating is when you ask for help. So when I was in school, I was sat next to the smartest girl. And that's how I got through school. I'm still doing the same thing,
You're still sitting next to the smartest girl, your wife, Kim. Is that right?
Yeah, she
helps you.
She's brilliant.
Yeah. I actually used to do the same. I used to copy. I was no good at maths. So every morning I'd copy my math homework from Danny Chan, who was a very smart Asian student who'd sit next to me. Boy, that made life a little bit easier.
Yeah. And in the real world, that's what entrepreneurs do. I have the best bookkeeper, accountants, attorneys, bankers, but in my poor dad's world, that was cheating. I asked for help because I was a C student. I was not very good at school. So I got through by cheating, and I just carried on. I still cheat.
So you surround yourself with good people. I've often said if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in trouble. I've also would like to put to you that some people would say that you've now become a perma-bear. You've been negative for a long, long time, predicting the market's going to crash. But Robert, it wasn't always that case, was it?
Well, you have to be both, a pessimist and an optimist, which makes you a realist. So because I could see this crash coming, I loaded up on gold and silver. Not paper gold, not paper silver. I have real gold, real silver coins and bars stored in different countries throughout the world. Because I don't trust the U.S. dollar. Like I'll tell you, the U.S. dollar is a criminal operation. The only way the dollar stayed strong was to get other countries into debt, like Aussies in debt to the U.S. That's why you guys had to ask for a bailout from the U.S. They don't tell you that. But so many countries are in debt to the U.S., so there's out of 80% of all debt in the world is denominated in U.S. dollars. So that's why the U.S. is so strong. It's because everybody has to pay us back in dollars. But it makes the Aussie weak. It damages the Aussie people. That's what pisses me off.
Well, considering we're going to have a rough time, let's see what opportunities there are, because there are always plenty of opportunities waiting for those with a financial education. So what upside do you see once we get through all this, Robert?
Well, I don't think we're going to get through it. I think we're changed forever, and it's best to prepare for that. Because I think to wait for the economy to come back is Dreamville. We've really changed forever. You look at Chapel Street and all that, all those little restaurants, they're gone.
Yes, they are.
That breaks my heart. All the little retail stores, they're gone. That breaks my heart. And so what are they going to do? Wait for it to come back? So that's why it's best to move on. And the thing I tell younger people, because I'm an old guy, that little cell phone, I think it came out in, the iPhone came out in 2007. It's the most powerful tool ever created in the history of the world for an entrepreneur. So you look at what we're doing right now. You're in Aussie, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and we're communicating. Well, that cell phone has that much power for about 1,000 US. So if you're an entrepreneur and you have an entrepreneurial mind, you can use that cell phone to get very rich. But if you haven't been trained to think that way, you're probably watching YouTube or porno on the thing or something.
You've often said that you don't need money to make money. So what tips do you have for small business owners, people who are trying to keep their business afloat in today's economy?
Well, I've been there, so I understand. I started a nylon and Velcro surfer wallet business, and this was the 70s. And I was extremely successful, except that I couldn't finance my success. I kept borrowing money to supply inventory. I was shipping all over the world. And then my partner ran off with the money, which I didn't foresee coming. This is in the 70s. I went down to $850,000. I was flat as a pancake. I was crushed. But it turned out to be the best thing because I went to see my rich dad, and he says, think about it this way. He says, every entrepreneur loses at least 3 businesses. You've lost number 1. You got 2 more to go. but then his attitude was, learn from your mistakes, and you'll be smarter the next time. So I did lose a second business. It was tough, but I got smarter. And pretty soon, there's a book by Nassim Taleb, Anti-Fragile. He talks about, he wrote The Black Swan, and the pandemic is the black swan. He says there's 3 kinds of people in the world. There's fragile, and those are those Tinkerbells, they're like champagne flutes. You hit them, they shatter. And then you have the robust. And the robust is a tough, like a rock. You can pound on them, nothing changes. And then you have anti-fragile. An anti-fragile person is somebody who comes back stronger. So I'm speaking to all the Aussies right now who are listening. If you've been hit by the truck right now, just remember to be anti-fragile. Learn from your mistakes. What mistakes did you make? What would you do different? And come back stronger. That's the most important thing right now.
I think that's a good point. So I'm a real success at failure, but every time I've got up one more time and I've managed to get to the next level. What other factors other than resilience, because you're talking about resilience there, what other factors does it take to be a successful entrepreneur, Robert?
Well, the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, when I was 9 years old growing up in Hawaii, my poor dad, like I said, was like a PhD, you know what I mean? And then they don't know anything about money. And so every time I kept asking him, when am I going to learn about money? He says, well, we don't teach money at school. And I couldn't understand that. I wanted to be rich. So he told me to go talk to my rich dad, who was my best friend's father. And that's where my life changed, is because the most important lesson I can offer to people today is choose your teachers wisely. Do you know what I mean? Like, look at YouTube and all these things. They have great teachers on YouTube, and they're for free. So, go there, find out which teacher resonates for you and all this, and study and learn from them. I was in Sunday school at age 7, where I kind of got the idea. My Sunday school, I'm not pumping religion, especially the Aussies.
You won't get very far, will you?
Anyway, so I'm 7 years old, and the Sunday school teacher says, what made the 3 wise men wise? So I was a little wise-ass kid, I said, well, one had frankincense, one had myrrh, and one had gold. That's why they were wise. They had money. She says, no. So finally, her answer, which she was looking for, was they were wise because they sought the best teacher. And in the Christian faith, it's Christ. In the Buddhist faith, is Buddha. In Muslim, is Muhammad. So the lesson for everybody today, again with the iPhone, you can access the best teachers throughout the world today. And because your best asset is between your left ear and your right ear. And you have a choice of what you put in it. So there's so many great teachers on iPhones today, better than universities. And they're free.
The problem, of course, is finding ones who are going to be good mentors to you, because it is so easy to get a website up now, to get a camera and look impressive. So there's some false prophets out there as well, aren't there, Robert?
There always has been, and there always will be.
I guess you've got to work through all that, don't you? At this stage, do you think it's easier to get into business with the smartphone, as you said, with the technology today than when you and I started in the 70s?
I would say so. It's definitely much easier. But the cell phone is only as good as what's between your left ear and your right ear. If there's nothing there, there's nothing on the cell phone. It's only a tool.
Now, I know you're an avid real estate investor, as am I, and that's where I've made my money in Australia. Where we may probably disagree at the moment is what's going to happen to the Australian property markets, but I'd love to know what your prediction is for house prices in Australia's capital cities.
I have some really good friends, Peter Johnson is, I talk to him all the time because I love Aussie. And when the Aussie went down to 55, I was ready to move into Australia with dollars.
Yes.
I think you guys are a sitting bargain. That's how I look at it. You have the best real estate in the world.
We're very lucky.
Yeah.
It's a very different tax system to the United States as well. So in Australia, 70% of Australians own their home. Currently, half of them haven't got a mortgage against their home. And those who do have a mortgage against their home, they're often very far advanced in their payments because our interest rates have come down over the years, but people have still kept up their payments. So in Australia, we believe our home's our castle, an asset. That's a bit different to what you talk about, Robert.
Well, it's not what I teach. It's when you look at a financial statement, which way is the cash flowing? So I own 3 homes. To me, they're liabilities because every month the cash flows out. I also own 8,000 rental units and the cash flows in. So those are assets. My personal residence is a liability because even though I have no debt on them, I still have maintenance, upkeep, insurance, and all that stuff on them. So it sucks money out of my pocket. So it's basically, in accounting, there's 3 financial statements that account: income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flow. And that's what they don't teach you in school. So I'm only a cash flow guy. I want to see which way the cash is flowing. So the reason so many people are in trouble today is, as you know, the cash is flowing out, nothing's flowing in. That's the problem. So I'm a cash flow guy. I'm not a capital gains guy. I don't say my house is now worth 2 million or 1 million and all that. I don't care about the value of the house. I just want to know which way is my cash flowing. Is it flowing in my pocket? It's an asset. If it's flowing out net, it's a liability. So that's my definition. So it's based upon the 3rd financial statement, the statement of cash flow.
Now, you've got a new book that's recently come out called Who Stole My Pension? Now, it may not be as relevant to Australia as other parts of the world, but would you just like to tell us what your message is in that book?
Hey, Michael, I know your superannuations are toast.
Mm.
You know that, I know that.
Oh, yes.
So every time I go to Aussie, you guys want to try and tell me it's different. You guys are getting screwed just like everybody else.
Right. In what way? I mean, you're right. In Australia, the statistics show that the majority of Australians' assets, the average Australian, is in their home and then their superannuation. Exactly.
Right. I don't know. I don't want to mention a bank because I just heard about them. You guys have a little few banking troubles, just like Deutsche Bank has troubles, Bank of Japan has troubles, HSBC has troubles right now. And that's what I was saying in September 2019, less than a year ago, when the repo market or the shadow banking system went down, the interest rates to the biggest banks in the world went to 10%. That means the banks are bankrupt. And they don't tell you that. So I know what's going on inside your banks, but on the surface, they look okay. So your supers, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I don't have a super. I don't need one. I don't have a 401k. I don't invest in the stock market. But I have a different education system. That's all I'm saying. We can argue till the cows come in, but I don't want a super.
Well, in Australia, it's compulsory, so employers have to give 9%, and it's increasing to more over the next couple of years of your income into super. So it's, I guess, a form of forced savings, which you're probably going to say, well, that's what the government's done to you because most people aren't financially literate. So they're forcing you to do it.
Well, you're going to find out pretty soon that just as Wall Street and Who Stole My Pension, the biggest export from the United States is not Toyotas or Chevrolets. The biggest export from the United States are toxic assets. And the place they stuff those toxic assets are in pensions. That's what Who Stole My Pension's about. It's the same as, the city of London. They're exporting toxic derivatives. So that's what London and America has been doing, is shipping to the rest of the world the worst possible toxic assets possible. And your supers are filled with them. Your pensions are filled with them. They haven't exploded yet. I hope they don't. But if they do, there's going to be hell to pay. In America today, let's look at the state of Kentucky. In 2019, Kentucky's state pensions for firefighters, school teachers, and police officers was 16% funded. That means if the pension owed $100, they had $16 in the bank. In March of 2020, it dropped to $9. Let me just say it again. The real problem took place under the banking surface in the shadow bank system. That's where the biggest banks in the world go to borrow money. They're broke. So that's why the interest rates in September 2019 went to 10%. but they've dropped the interest rates for the consumer in America because American consumers are still enough to keep borrowing. But they wouldn't lend to the biggest banks. And then suddenly in late December and January, coronavirus pops up. And I think it's a smokescreen to cover, I could be wrong. I think it's a smokescreen to cover up from the collapse of the banking system.
Well, you're not the only person who thinks that, are you, Robert?
No.
Now, I'd like to take you back to a couple of years ago, and I've actually got them on my bookshelf behind me here. You wrote a couple of books with Donald Trump before he was president. What was it like dealing with him in those days?
There's no two Donald Trumps. There's only one. And you know who he is at that moment. That's what I like about him. You know what I mean? He's pretty straightforward. And he's a good guy. His staff loves him. I enjoyed working with him. But you have to have a pretty thick skin. You don't have a thick skin. And he'll tell you exactly as he thinks at that moment. He can change his mind, but he'll tell you that moment. But he's a man's man, as you know, if you know what I mean. Yes.
He
likes the ladies like most guys do.
Well, even though we're on the other side of the world, we get the world news and we see what's happening there all the time. Now, Robert, you would normally be coming to Australia, but you're not this time round. On the other hand, you are going to do it virtually, and maybe that's the way it's going to work in the future anyway. So in the show notes, we're going to put a link to the website robertandharry.com because you're having a virtual seminar with Harry Dent, who I've just a short while ago interviewed for the Michael Yardney podcast as well. What message are you going to be giving to Australians, and why should they take the time out on the 24th of May to attend that virtual seminar?
Well, Harry Dent is one of those guys I listen to. And the reason is his niche, his forte, his genius is trends. And, you know, what happened this year with the coronavirus, the world completely changed. And so anybody who said, well, I'm going to go back and open up a chicken shop, you know, you're probably going to get hammered. So what Harry's going to be talking about and what I'm going to be talking about is how do we negotiate forward into the brave new world? What trends can you expect? And so every entrepreneur, every business person should come there and listen. Not that we'll give you the answers, but we're just going to tell you what we see coming in the world. That's like I said, I'll say it again and again and again. In September 2019, I saw this crash coming simply because the interest rates on the biggest banks in the world went to 10%. The average guy missed it. If you had seen that, you would have got out of the markets.
So do you believe that there's going to be opportunities on the other side once we cross the bridge?
Amen. Bigger than ever before. But you have to change your mindset. Look at my little rich dad company, you know. We're making money hand over fist right now. But we didn't predict this coming. We're prepared for it. So all the products we made, all our marketing materials were prepared for this time. Whereas if I was opening a chicken shop, I'd be dead. You know, but it's a matter of seeing what's going to come next. Because I don't know how it is in Aussie, but they're going to make restaurants social distance. You know what I mean? So that means your price per square foot's going to go up.
They're talking about that here too. Exactly right. How are you going to make money paying the same rents? That's going to be a real problem for commercial real estate, isn't it? In all sorts of ways.
Correct. So that's what we're going to be talking about on our podcast. It's not to tell you what to do, but this is a global collapse right now. And we've got to look at the world from that point of view. Like I'm studying China right now. China's in serious trouble. Now, if China's in trouble, it's like when I used to go to Aussie all the time. They said when America sneezed, Aussie caught cold. Well, what changed in 74 when Nixon went to China? Aussie is now dependent upon China more than the U.S. And so I'm concerned about China because if they're in serious trouble, which they are, it's going to affect everybody, including the U.S. So that's what we pay attention to. It's just being aware.
There's going to be a change in the globalization of the world also. People are having a different view on how much dependence you're going to have on any one country.
Correct. And then it's like for us at Rich Dad, when like Trump is, I know people hate him, but he's a good guy. I'll tell you, he's a really good, he's a straight shooter, no bullshit. And that's what I want, you know. But anyway.
He polarizes people, doesn't he?
Yes.
They either love him or they hate him. We have a lot of American friends, and interestingly, quite a few in Arizona. Why does everyone end up in Arizona? Only a couple of days ago, we were having a Zoom session with some friends that we've met on a cruise in Arizona. I hope we're going to start cruising again. We haven't for a while. And we meet all the Americans. They either love Trump or they hate Trump. And once we came in contact with a couple where she liked him and he hated him. You couldn't have a conversation at that table, Robert.
And there's no sense trying to change their mind. You know what I mean?
No, you can't. You can't.
But when I started talking to him and all this, he kind of alluded to me, this idea of globalization is over. We're going national. So with that, my company shifted our manufacturing out of China into the United States. So that's why we're not hurting.
Almost everything that we're getting in Australia is coming from China. So all the European brands, the label is may have a big international company name, but you wonder where it's made from. So I also see, as you do, opportunities now that Australia is going to have to become more self-dependent. Similarly, there's still opportunities for us to be the food and education centre of Southeast Asia. One last hint then.
Well, I really believe this is the time for the entrepreneur, big time. Like I said, that iPhone or cell phone, whatever you want to call it, it gave us such power to market to the world. So Aussie is, remote, but it's really not remote at all, from the perspective of the iPhone.
Not anymore.
So the world is closer for Aussies and Kiwis. This is the best time for you guys. But you have to change your reference on who your market is, who your customers are, what your products are. And Aussies, I'll just say this much, your reputation, Aussie reputation and Kiwi reputation is clean, not like the US. You have a great reputation. The world respects you guys, especially in the world of rugby. But anyway, so that's
yeah, they've closed that down too at the moment. So this is our winter season here, and the various codes, the Australian football code and the rugby codes, are fighting hard to get going again, and they may have a shorter season this time round. Well, Robert, I really appreciate you giving us your time and giving us your insights. While we don't agree on everything, I really think it's important to go forward without blinkers on, to look at all manner of opinions, especially from those who've got a track record. And especially even if you don't agree with them, otherwise you're just going to be stuck in your confirmation bias and probably end up in the wrong spot, Robert.
That's a very accurate word, confirmation bias, because we all have to have an open mind today because the world has changed forever. I do mean forever. The good news is we've entered the information age, and that leverages our brains or our minds and our abilities. And look at what we're doing at this moment. This is amazing. This was not available a few years ago. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. So going right back to where we started with the 4 quadrants, this time, the time moving forward, is going to actually be a great time for business owners and investors, and probably not as good for people who are going to be employees. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say that. There's a couple other things that you have to watch out for is taxes. You guys are getting taxes, debt, and all this stuff. So there's a lot of things underneath, like I call it the shadow system.
Mm-hmm.
That's changing a lot, which you got to pay attention to.
Well, the governments have been borrowing, or I guess spending trillions of dollars, the biggest percentage of GDP ever, to try and prevent the recession that we're in the middle of. Even though the statistics haven't come out, we really are. If you look at it, if you walk down the street, you can see that we are in the middle of a recession. How are they going to work their way out of that?
There was a guy named Albert Einstein, and I have a bust of him in my office just to keep me thinking. And the quote I have from Einstein is, imagination is more important than knowledge. And we all have imaginations. And we have the tools now, like the Zoom call and all this other stuff and the iPhone. We just need a little bit more imagination. And I'll say it again, Aussie has got one of the best reputations in the world. And that counts a lot in today's world of branding. You know what I mean? The Aussie brand is great. The Kiwi brand is fantastic. Where the U.S. brand is tarnished, China is kind of tarnished, Europe's in trouble. So you guys are you're in the driver's seat. You just need a little bit more imagination and a little bit more oomph, you know.
So thank you very much for your time, Robert, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, me too. It's changing so fast.
You don't know what you're going to say yet? You're going to make it up between now and then, are you?
No, it's changing so fast.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's accelerating. So it's exciting is what I'm saying.
But it is. Yeah, you've got to have a positive attitude, and clearly you're an optimist. So once again, thank you so much for your time. Well, I told you Robert would have some extreme views, and he didn't let us down, did he? I'd like to now give you an alternative view, my view, about two of Robert's main assertions, what's in store for our economy, and I'm going to base that not on Michael Yardney's thoughts, but on some other economists, and also his concept of what makes a good property investment in Australia. And yes, I am basing that on my thoughts, but I think I'm well positioned to give you my opinion. So first, let's talk about property. Clearly, Robert's an ardent property investor. In fact, he said he owns 3 homes and 8,000 rental properties. So clearly he knows a bit about real estate. Now, when I say he knows a bit about real estate, I guess I mean he knows about United States real estate, where the rules are very different, where the tax regime is very different, where the markets are very different, where the way you invest is very different. In fact, I wouldn't invest the way I invest in Australia in New Zealand, where the rules are very different, or in the United States. Now, in previous podcasts and in my blogs, I've explained why Australian real estate is very different to overseas, but unfortunately, many overseas gurus just don't get it. You see, our property markets here are underpinned by the fact that the 10.4 million properties around Australia are in general owned by homeowners. In fact, 70% are owned by homeowners, and half of these homeowners don't even have a mortgage against their properties. This is very, very, very different to overseas. Of the other half who do have a mortgage, many of them are well ahead in their payments, while others are using their mortgage to support the purchase of investment properties which do bring cash in. Now, clearly, there's no real debt problem in Australia, or not with Australian real estate assets, because the total value of residential real estate in Australia, according to CoreLogic, is $7.4 trillion. And the total outstanding loans against these properties are $1.83 trillion. In other words, we have a loan-to-value ratio for residential real estate, all residential properties in Australia, of around 25%. So when overseas gurus come and tell us our banks are overexposed to property, there's no doubt they have a very large exposure to the property market, but with a loan-to-value ratio of around 25%, there's no debt bubble here. Sure, some people have overcommitted. Some first home buyers have, some investors have, but I'm not suggesting that there's a bubble in Australia, and I think those who think there are probably wrong. Now, if you haven't listened to last week's show where I interviewed Harry Dent and then Pete Wargent and I unpacked some of the thoughts about the economy and the property market, go back to the Michael Yardney podcast and listen to that too, because we're going to go into more detail then about Australian real estate and the economy. But the other argument I'd have with Robert is that he suggests that your home is not an asset. And his argument for that is there's no income coming in, only expenses going out, and therefore your home's not an asset, but a liability. Now, if you accept Robert's definition of an asset, in other words, something that brings cash flow in, then he's right. But that's not my definition of an asset, and that's not the common definition of an asset. It has nothing to do with cash flow. Let me explain. The fact that Robert invests in gold and silver suggests he believes that they're an asset. However, they don't bring in cash flow, do they? So the definition of an asset bringing in cash flow isn't right. Look, I believe if you have $1 million in your bank account, that would be an asset, even though it would hardly bring any cash into your pocket. And I believe if you took it out of the bank and put it under your mattress, that $1 million would still remain an asset, even with no cash flow. So I believe Robert's assumptions that your home is not an asset is flawed. Similarly, I see that there are 4 ways that you make money out of property investments in Australia, and Robert is a cash flow investor, and that's what's appropriate for the tax rules and the system in the United States. But it has not made people wealthy in Australia. So I see there's 4 ways you get income from your investment properties. Firstly, through capital growth. Secondly, through a rental return. Thirdly, through tax benefits. And fourthly, through accelerated or manufactured capital growth, where you manufacture growth through renovations or development. Of all of those, tax-free capital growth is the most important. Unfortunately, though, too many people look for cash flow from their residential real estate investments, and that's just not how residential real estate works in Australia. In Australia, residential real estate's a high growth, relatively low yield investment, and to try and make it something different just bastardizes it, and the results don't allow you to build a substantial asset base to give you a cash machine in the future. Similarly, Robert's concerns about our superannuation funds not being fully funded, that's actually not correct. Sure, some government superannuation funds may not be, but the average superannuation fund that you and I are part of are fully funded. Okay, well, what about Robert's thoughts about our economy? Now, there's no doubt that Australia's economy, and that of most countries in the world, is going to experience a recession. In Australia, it's likely to commence in the second quarter of 2020, in other words, the quarter we're in right now, and inevitably there's going to be some horrible numbers coming out in the media scaring people. There's going to be a decrease in our GDP, our economic growth, or lack of it, and there's going to be some terrible unemployment figures coming out. But currently, a combination of monetary and fiscal policies should see us begin to rebound in the third or fourth quarter of this year. Now, I know that's not what Harry Dent said when I interviewed him for my podcast last week. It's not what Robert said today. But while Robert is an innovative thinker and an expert in personal finance, he's not an economist. Now, Robert clearly said that he sees a bright, medium and long-term future for Australia. But as you heard, he's very negative about the world's and Australia's short-term economic future. Now, while I've been a student of economics for almost 50 years, I'm not a qualified economist, but there are some very astute economists employed by our banks, by the Reserve Bank of Australia, by the International Monetary Fund, and they all see a difficult 6 months ahead for us, but nowhere near as negative a picture as some of the headline-grabbing naysayers in the media at the moment. Now, I don't want to downplay what's ahead, because even with an unprecedented easing of monetary and fiscal policy, there's a lot of uncertainty still. And that's because our economic recovery depends on a couple of things. Partly the path of the coronavirus, which at present we seem to have under control, but also on restoring household and business confidence. Until confidence is restored, people aren't going to be spending. They're going to be stashing their cash, and that will slow down the economy. Now, recently, the Reserve Bank of Australia updated its economic forecasts. It did this in its May statement on monetary policy. And the RBA provided 3 economic scenarios: a baseline, an upside and a downside. The baseline scenario is for a very large fall in activity of about 10% in the first half of 2020, with unemployment reaching about 10% in the second quarter of this year, so over the next couple of months. And then they expect our recovery to start as health restrictions are rolled back. Corona containment measures have seen consumer spending and business investment fall sharply as people have lost their jobs and there's restrictions in how much you can spend. And other businesses have just sought to secure their cash flow, conserve their cash flow. They're seeing there's not much demand. They're not sure what's ahead. And of course, travel bans have seen a collapse in tourism and education, which are both big exports for Australia. So I'm not downplaying what's ahead. But the Reserve Bank notes that while it expects employment to fall 8% or by about 1 million workers, there's going to be a sharp 20% fall in the total number of hours worked as well. So it's actually not just more people being unemployed, but those who are employed are going to probably not work as many hours, have as much cash. They're going to be a bit cautious. So yeah, this is going to affect our economy. I'm not playing that down. It means there's going to be an extremely large hit to household incomes, even despite this extensive government handout and the wage subsidy schemes. And that's going to weigh on consumer spending during the recovery. The Reserve Bank also warns that while it expects unemployment to rise to 10%, it's uncertain about how many people are actually even going to drop out of the labour force during that time. But its baseline case is that unemployment will then recover from 10% in the middle of this year to maybe about 6.5% in a year's time. In other words, unemployment is going to go up, and then as the recovery takes hold, jobs are going to be created and people are going to get their jobs again, and over time, unemployment is going to drop. Now, yes, we can have a hard time. So why am I so against or different to what Harry Dent said last week or Robert Kiyosaki said this week? Let me give you 3 arguments put by AMP's chief economist Shane Oliver, who I have a lot of respect for, and you've heard in my weekly Property Insider videos with Andrew Wilson, he has similar views. But there are 3 good reasons why Australia is well placed to rebound from the current shutdown compared to other countries in the world, and why it won't be so bad here. First of all, we've flattened the curve of the coronavirus remarkably quickly. So that's put us in a much better position. It's actually shortened the initial phase of lockdown quickly. Secondly, going into this, Australia was in a strong fiscal position, thanks in part to the resources boom and maybe to more prudent budget management. And our fiscal response has been the biggest across the entire G20 countries, not in terms of loans and guarantees, which tend to saddle businesses and individuals with more debt, but in terms of direct support, actual spending and revenue measures the government has done. The government stimulus packages were initially designed for a 6-month hibernation of the economy. I'm sure you remember Scott Morrison saying that. I was scared when I heard him say this is going to be the way for 6 months. But we could be back to business. We should be back to business much sooner than that. And so that's another reason why we're not going to have as bad a result as other countries around the world. And thirdly, China, which is our biggest trading partner, has brought COVID-19 under control, and as such is 2-3 months ahead of the rest of the world in ramping up its activities, and it's going hell for leather to do that. There's early signs of infrastructure spending, construction uplift, and this is terrific news for Australia, since China is now our far most important trading partner. So we should once again benefit in terms of our resources economy. And that's been showing up in some of the latest figures. In fact, the international trade figures for March showed a tremendous uplift in the value of Australian exports, especially to China. Of course, the second quarter of 2020, the quarter we're currently in, will inevitably produce, as I said before, some horrible numbers. Don't be scared when you're reading this in the media. It's not the end of the world. The government has thrown everything it can at this. It has learned from the past, but so have other governments around the world as well. So a combination of monetary policy, lowering interest rates, quantitative easing, keeping interest rates low, and fiscal responses such as tax benefits and infrastructure spending should see us begin the great rebound in the second half of this year. Well, there was a lot to take in there, wasn't there? But I hope I've shown you that there's more than one way of looking at what's ahead. And the answer is we've got to get through it. You haven't come this far just to come this far. So therefore, if you've got a good job and if you've got a secure job, I believe there's some great opportunities for people to take advantage of businesses, as Robert Kiyosaki said, but I wouldn't be starting up a new business today. I'd be starting up a property investment business today if you don't own an investment property. And if you do and you're in a good position to add to your portfolio, it would be a great time to get your finances right, to get your ownership structures right, to see what your borrowing capacity is, and take advantage of this window of opportunity while Australia's cocooned, because the cocoon is opening up and we're coming out. And when we do, in my mind, and in that of a lot of clever economists who are paid a lot more than me to run our country, there's going to be some great opportunities ahead. And if you'd like my team at Metropole to be part of that with you, why not go to metropole.com.au, because I believe you need more than just a buyer's agent. You need more than a property strategist in these challenging times. You need somebody who's going to give you a holistic approach, and that's what our team does. We'll give you some direction, we'll give you certainty, we'll give you the results by putting a strategic property plan to you, helping with wealth advisory, financial planning, property management, property renovation, development. There's a whole range of services. Go to metropole.com.au. You can choose some of our services or the one-stop shop. But we've lived through a number of these downturns. Fortunately, we have learned from our past, so therefore there's no company in a better position than Metropole to help give you the guidance, direction and results that you're looking for, go to metropole.com.au, find out about what we can do, and get my team to be on your side to help you. Now, if you got some benefit from this show, I'd appreciate you telling other people as well, because just like Robert Kiyosaki is keen to get as many people as possible financially independent, you've heard me say that at the end of this show. That's always also been my aim, to help more people become successful in money and property in all areas of their life. So tell somebody about the show, pass it on through social media, leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or wherever you listen to the show, and I'll be back twice a week. In the meantime, you can catch up with me on social media. Have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favorite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?